Iowa's News Now Sports has your all-access pass to all things Hawkeyes. This is Eye on the Hawks.
Last season on Eye on the Hawks. And this is the point that if we would have taken the time, you'd have like a 3-minute cool cut up, a reel of like all our best sound bites, all the best highlights we shot.
Did we have those?
No, we didn't do that. So welcome to season 2 of Eye on the Hawks. We're just going to wing it because we didn't cut the reel. It was a really good idea I had like 20 minutes ago. Mitch Fick, Owen Sebring, Mike Howell here. Setting the table for the 2024 season. A lot going on. A very happy birthday, first and foremost, to Kirk Ferentz, who is probably working like crazy as he is wont to do on every birthday around this time. He just starts camp every year. I'm sure he'd like nothing more than for a birthday than to keep just heading to camp and starting another season there. So happy birthday to Coach.
Enjoying the nicest of birthdays today. Happy birthday, Kirk.
Not too warm out there. Maybe a little cooling off. We'll take it. We'll take that, certainly. It is day 2 of camp down there in Iowa City. We didn't cut the reel, but the good folks at the Iowa Football Video Department have been hard at work already. We got our first look at camp yesterday. Slow motion, nice little cut-ups there. I met Drew, the new guy on staff who started during the spring session, came in from Madison, Wisconsin, the Badger program there. He's been doing really good work. So we got our first look at the 2024 fall edition of the Hawks, which has some differences. Number 7 receiver is not Jacob Bostic anymore. He's a Texas A&M Aggie. So that is Dayton Howard now. So you've got a few new faces. Kade McNamara out there actually competing, was going through, just walk through stuff in the spring. Caden Weegan still looks very fast. That's Brendan Sullivan, number 1. And of course, if you're just listening to this, you don't know that we're watching the video right now. As always, if you remember season 1, head of the YouTube channel, we do these live and we're looking at the videos and going through our highlights and the interviews and everything as we go. So I don't know if we want to, and Jacob Gill walking out the very first shot there. So what do we,
shot.
Yeah, let's pretend that's Brian Allen, that's Jay Higgins, that's Jamari Harris.
I'm always interested though.
That's a high five from Kade.
Do these clips that make it? Do you think there's any because there's a shot of Jazz and he's really been kind of the forgotten running back all offseason, but he's the only. Well, I guess KJ's in there, but and there's Molden. But is there any purpose to this?
Caden Weegan looks so fast. That was my big takeaway. He had a burst of the right there, and then he scored. Carson Jar couldn't cut up.
I feel like if they're anything like me, it's like you just take your best shots, the ones that look the coolest and are going to be the most eye-pleasing, and that's what you get.
And the eyes have been pleased, absolutely.
I don't read too much into it. Do you guys, I feel like every time they release one of these sizzle reels, Mitch, you seem to really get into it or find some nugget out of it. I'm
just fun.
Frank.
It's just fun. As you said, it's the best shot, so you're seeing the cream of the crop what the video team's done. And it's just, again, Brendan Sullivan out there for the first time, Dayton Howard, he's got a number switch, him and Jarrett Bowie have different numbers, and I'm sure there are a few others, but it's our first sign of fall. Yep. It's like the leaves changing.
You are seeing some numbers changes, which is a little bit interesting in my world, but especially for the big Hawkeye fans, I guess that's just it, that you're getting to the point where you're a month out from the actual season, and so you're just excited to see anybody wearing a black and gold uniform.
Yeah, we're Quinn Schulte, Brett Greenwood days out from kickoff. 30 days now until kickoff on August 31st against Illinois State. Speaking of making bold assumptions about things that are happening in the summer, Mike, let's bring up that depth chart real quick if we can. Do we want to jump right into that?
Yeah, let's do it. 1 second. Give me
let's make some bold assumptions about a piece of paper that came out in late July. Formulate our entire belief system in this team. So here we go. We'll run through it real quick. Kade, again, we've heard from the very beginning, if he's healthy, he's your number 1. Marco Linez, saw him a little bit in the bowl game and cleanup duty. He's your number 2. Brendan Sullivan. Started a few games for the Wildcats over a couple seasons, transferring in from Northwestern. He's your number 3 right now. So again, up in arms. Throw a fit about that. We'll talk about it in a little bit. LaShawn, Caleb, and Kamari making up the running back room. Jazz Patterson, who Mike just mentioned, not there on the 3, so you have to assume he's RB4. Hayden Large was listed as a tight end coming back for a grad year. He is still, though, your starting fullback in front of Eli Miller. Caleb Brown, Terrell Washington Jr. saw him split out at wide receiver, playing running back last year. He's at 1 wide receiver. Jarrett Bowie, one of the guys we talked about, switching numbers from 84 to 0, backed up by the new number 7, Dayton Howard, who I believe was number 20 last year. Seth Anderson and Caden Weegan in the other spot, the pride of Williamsburg there, backing up Seth. Luke Lachey, Addison Estrenga, that is a great 1-2 punch at tight end. And Tim Lester, who we'll certainly talk about a lot, loves his tight ends from everything we've heard. And then your Offensive line looks pretty similar. No Rusty Feth after his 1 year out of Miami, Ohio, but Mason Richmond, Bo Stevens, Logan Jones, Connor Colby, Jennings Dunker, your starting line. Nick DeYoung in there as a backup. Saw him squeeze in a couple of times. Same as Tyler Ellsbury. Kade Pieper, the Soul and Beef Days hay bale toss champion, in there at left guard, backing up Bo Stevens, a kid we heard about quite a bit. Instant reactions on the offensive depth chart heading into fall camp.
A couple things that you like. I mean, we talked about it after spring camp or spring practice. Terrell Washington Jr. at wide receiver. I wonder if he stays there. He's on the depth chart officially. One big thing, I don't know if this is just the Lester offense or whatever, is before last year and ever since Kirk's been here, he's had 2 receivers on the depth chart. There's 3 now. So, you saw Jarrett Bowie, he was right at the top, and I don't know if they did this on purpose, but they spread out the receivers not all in a row. So it was kind of be like, oh, he's our number one. But I don't know if you could say that he's the number one. And, Brendan Sullivan at number 3, you mentioned it. Kirk said at media days he hasn't put on a helmet yet. Yeah. Well, he has now. Yeah. But he hasn't before this.
He's put on a helmet once for Iowa, yeah.
Yeah, so you can't put him ahead of anyone until he shows you what he's made of. The offensive line, one of the most veteran in the entire country.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Mason Richmond, a 4-year starter at left tackle. And, again, a guy in Tyler Ellsbury who's started a handful of games right behind Logan Jones, going into 3rd year starting center. And Nick DeYoung, a guy that Kirk talked about a few times last year who can plug in anywhere, did have to plug in a couple spots when Jennings was beat up, and Nick started the Big Ten championship game and a couple other games too. So that's a 6-year senior who came back looking to shore up the line out of Pella.
A few things. I don't have any assumption that Brendan Sullivan is actually going to be the number 3 quarterback once the season starts. I think they, just kind of by proxy have to put him there because he hasn't played a game yet and he's new to the roster. But I'm pretty positive that every conversation we've had with Iowa football players sounds like Brendan's going to be the number 2. So I would imagine that's going to get flipped around a little bit. The wide receiver spot is interesting. I don't know the first thing about Dayton Howard, a redshirt freshman on the team. I know that we've lost some receivers to the portal, but there's a few guys on the roster that maybe I've at least heard their names thrown around a little bit more. So I'm a little surprised to see him as a number 2.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mitch, but Dayton did play in a few games, right, as a freshman?
Jarrett ran with the ones a few times. I don't think he had a catch. I know Dayton Howard, talk about sizzle reels and things we take away from those. He had, it might have been the Lester mic'd up video in the spring.
Okay.
He had, and it was before the number switch, but he had a really great downfield in traffic catch for a big game that they threw in there. So that's
what I might be thinking.
Piqued my interest of, okay, let's keep an eye on this kid, a redshirt freshman, I believe. I want to say out of the Kansas area. I'm just saying off the top of my head. Park Hill, Kansas City. I tell you what, that pipeline to Kansas City, it brought us Mason Richmond, a couple other guys, so we'll take it.
Yeah. Jarrett Bowie is an interesting guy to be a number 1 again after, we haven't seen him.
He ran with the ones a decent amount last year,
really?
Particularly early non-conference. He was number 84 again.
Did he have catches last year?
He had no catches, but he played in a few games. It's interesting, too. He was talked about at I don't know if you guys watched Kirk at Big Ten Media Days. He was asked about being at the top of the list. I honestly, I don't think that means he's number 1. I just think it's random.
Again,
he was on the top.
This is a late July depth chart, but
they had good things to say about him, and you need a pass catcher to make some plays. And if you want to go to those videos, if it means anything, he was in a photo on the first day. There was videos of him, catching the ball. Iowa needs one of these receivers, hopefully multiple, to step up, though. So you hope he can make that leap.
And boy, we're going to get some interesting looks out of the receiver spot with Caleb Brown, who's going to be missing for the first game. So guys like Howard and potentially Washington, potentially Weegan. Who's going to start that first game at receiver with Brown out? Is it going to be Weegan, you think?
With Brown out, I assume going to the depth chart, you put Bowie in there. I think Weegan could start, though.
Well, Bowie's already listed as a number 1.
Yeah, there's 12 guys on the depth chart.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because there's a fullback in there. I do think Iowa will run a lot of no fullback sets, or 2 tight end sets. So there's never going to be 3. Well, I shouldn't say never. There won't always be 3 receivers on the field.
Yeah, I gotcha. I would imagine we'll see a lot of two tight end sets. Seems like everything we've heard too is a Hayden Large. I think that even
he was listed as a fullback or as a tight end.
Right.
That was kind of coming into the spring, I believe. And he's now listed as a fullback, so they switched him back. But he's played tight end. But you also got Johnny Pascuzzi. You've got Zach Ortworth. You got a few guys in there that can plug in. Listen, one of the first things we heard about Tim Lester is this guy loves tight ends that can catch a pass. So anybody, and we might still be we talked about this a little bit in the spring, in the toy box phase of this. Again, coming into fall practices now, Brendan Sullivan hadn't taken any snaps yet. Kade hadn't really had any live action throughout the spring. A guy then Jacob Bostic, who was getting a lot of run with the ones, he's gone. So you're getting some guys in there. Seth Anderson was injured all spring too. So Tim Lester had 15 practices to kind of figure out his offense. Deacon Hill transfers, Jacob Bostic transfers, Seth Anderson's healthy now, a couple other guys, Kade is healthy now. He's kind of, I'm sure, still kind of figuring out what he has. You only have those 15 spring practices. Guys go away for a couple months, now you get back in. You're kind of doing an inventory again of seeing what you got, and I think that plays into Terrell Washington moving out to wide receiver. Again, knowing his teams in Kalamazoo at Western Michigan, it was if you can make a play, we'll find a spot to kind of move you around. I think this is going to be a lot less structured, and I don't mean like hashtag backyard football type stuff, of just, hey, if you're a dude, we'll get you in there and we'll see what you can do, because that's a lot of what he did in Kalamazoo to pretty good success.
To your point, I listened. Chad Lesko had an interview with Tim Lester
really
yesterday.
Good, really good listen to plug another podcast there.
He actually just moved to Iowa City like in the next few days or past few days, and he said he hasn't met a lot of the guys, and he's still that kind of that period where you're getting to meet 95 to 100. Yeah,
he's figuring out names on top of scheme and where these guys fit and things.
But to me, it does seem like he's one of those guys, and I think Iowa's been missing this, where like take T.J. Washington and Weegan, playmakers who like, in a few years, no, let's get him on the field. Let's make him plays now.
Yeah.
Let's figure out ways
to
get him in the play and get the ball in their hand and make plays, because the offense needs playmakers.
My only note about the offensive line, because boy, you do like what you see out of this. I know that Connor Colby's a guy that maybe could have tested the waters at the NFL draft this last year and possibly could have either gotten drafted or picked up a free agent deal. Jennings Dunker, a guy that is big and we imagine we'll see in the NFL one day. Could be the same for Jones and Richmond, who's to say. At the left guard spot, I would say that we might see a little bit of movement in that position, only because we hear so many good things about Cade Pieper, that's a guy that by the end of the year might be moved into that starting spot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get some meaningful reps. As we all know, and as Tristan Wirfs proved to us today with the largest contract in NFL history for an offensive lineman, if you win Solon Beef Days hay bale toss, you're probably pretty good at playing offensive line for Iowa. I'm skipping around a little bit here on the rundown that Mike diligently put together, so shame on me of the 2024
Should we go to the
campaign.
defense?
Let's, Cade McNamara, who's back obviously, as we're talking about the offense, hasn't had a ton of time on the field for Coach Lester in the spring, was still rehabbing the knee, but has spent plenty of time with him and talked about just getting to know Tim, his philosophies and everything like that. You see the big brace there on the left knee. Let's start with that soundbite. We will stay in order. Let's hear first about the brace, because this is something that Cade, when we first got to talk to him a couple weeks ago, first time we'd heard from him since before the injury, that he had to talk about the notion and the rationale of wearing that big of a brace, something that might work on one of the guys ahead of him blocking for him, but a reason for where he is for wearing that.
Yeah, well, I've been recommended to wear the brace, so I'm probably going to wear the brace for the season. I don't need the brace. When I'm out here conditioning, when I'm cutting and everything, I'm not using the brace at all, honestly. I think it's just more of just because it is my plant leg, that it's just going to be in and around where the line is going to be at all the time. So to be honest, I don't really care if I wear the brace or not, but that's just been what's recommended to me. So as far as my level of timidness or whatever, I think at the beginning when I was just starting to get back into throwing, it was tough because I was as I'm transferring my weight to my front side and then you have to rotate on it, I was just kind of timid to put all my weight and fully transition into it. But now that I've really just put a lot of reps into it and I know I have the strength and the flexibility to do everything now, really just because of the way my mechanics are working out, I don't need to rely on really using my front leg as much as more as just using my core to rotate. So I'm not timid at all when it comes to throwing or anything like that. I'm well past that.
And he makes a good point there, that left leg that the brace is on, that isn't his plant leg, that's not his load leg, and so he's not trying to do a whole lot with that. Hopefully, we saw what happened last time he tried to do that. So yeah, if they recommend it, it's probably a good thing to do. And I think it was good to see that you talked about not being timid. I mean, that softball game that there were pictures and videos of as they wrapped up spring practice where he's diving and high stepping to home plate. And just, again, a 23, almost 24-year-old kid, I think, who is out there just having fun and playing games. I mean, that's the thing. I know we're all hoping he's healthy and can have a successful season on the football field, but the guy's just having fun out there with the boys. He was in Kade's corner. Kade was in Kade's corner for beef days and just looked like he was enjoying himself an Iowa Friday summer.
Kind of everything, all of our experience and perspectives, and Coach Lesser being nothing but open and honest with us, and really pushing us to. I think the biggest thing has been a mental push with us. Is he's forcing everyone to learn as much as we possibly can in this short amount of time. That way, when it comes time for season, we can fine-tune some things and make things more game-specific.
John Steppe in mid-season phone holding form.
That is one of the fun things about being on the TV side and getting all these sound bites every week is kind of seeing where the beat writers are positioned. You might get a Chad Leistico cameo in there. John Steppe working for the Gazette, certainly doing a great job. Tyler Tashman, all those guys, Scott Docterman, Pat Hardy, everybody else, John Bonkamp, all those guys. But yeah, it's really tough for the new kid or the new 40-something guy to walk into a program that is so steeped in its way and in tradition, going through a tumultuous departure of Brian Ferentz, who's now going to be an analyst in Maryland for Mike Loxley's team. But that's a tough spot, and it feels like it has gone about as well as it could. And I don't know if you attribute that to the fact that he's just a likable dude. He's a former quarterback, and he's got a little bit of that quarterback swagger. Has had successful offenses at the college level at Western Michigan. Coached the dude when he was quarterback's coach at Western Michigan in Tim Hiller to basically break all his records. It just feels like he has just that connectivity, maybe a selfless guy, and I'm sure the fact that he's bringing a little something new to the table doesn't hurt either when trying to make those connections with these college kids.
Yeah, Kade, even in that soundbite, he said, because everything's completely new.
Yeah.
And that perks your ear up. There's a lot of fans, and at first I was in that boat where it's like, well, Kirk's been here 30 years, almost 30 years, like he's not changing. I'll believe it when I see it. And to some extent, I still believe that, but and another extent, when you listen to Tim Lesser talk, they are installing a new offense, and it's still going to be run heavy. They want to run the ball first to open up the pass, and that's why I'm sure Kirk was like, all right, let's go with Tim. But it seems to me like the new features of, a Shanahan-style offense from the NFL will be a fresh, it'll be just fresh, and I think it do wonders for this Iowa offense that seems to be stuck in philosophies from, even just 10 years ago. College football changed a lot, and when the same teams kind of know what you're doing, it can make it difficult to move the ball.
Yeah, I think you can keep the philosophy and change the scheme. And we saw, again, a little bit just in the spring, just a few more sweeps, some fun plays that you can now play in College Football 25 from EA Sports. I don't know how often, Mike, I don't know if you've played it all, Owen, but Mike's, are you using that shovel pass as much as I am right now on College Football 25?
I'm not. Those RPOs and all the other, I'll call them gadget plays. Is there one in Iowa's playbook? I changed Iowa's playbook.
I don't know. I
thought it was
use
too boring.
It's in there. There's sweeps and everything, yeah.
Yeah. I've done the options. The RPOs are kind of tough. I threw a pick six on one that was just like, what is the CPU doing? If that game is any fortune of how Iowa's offense is, the best receiver will be Jacob Gill.
Wow.
At least when I'm playing.
Jacob Gill and some no-name guy, like Caleb Johnson didn't opt in yet, or there's something like that. So there's like an Alvin Irvin or something like that.
Yeah.
Number 17, who's just like some dude.
Yeah. And
It's
LaShawn's pretty good in that game.
LaShawn's really good.
I'm sure he's happy about that because he's a video game nerd.
Right.
But yeah, that game's been what I've been doing the past few weeks.
Okay. That's really what this podcast needs to be.
Yeah.
It's just us airing our grievances of the passing system's really hard, tackling's really hard. All that
I have
stuff.
faith in Caleb Brown, but that game really did him dirty on how many drops I have per game.
Sounds like maybe someone's not throwing the ball as well as they should.
Maybe that's it.
I have no video game input, but I do have input from the Zach Johnson Classic where we had a chance to follow again around Tim Lester. This is a video I probably should have cut or contributed to the podcast. Was afterwards he was signing autographs, and then all of his offensive linemen came over and were talking to him afterwards, and they were chatting about who like drinking Busch Light and other Midwest brewskis, that kind of thing. But it seems like I don't know how much at that point they'd had a chance to really work with him, but just a guy that is like very sociable and congenial and seems to really like being out there in the community with the fans. And I don't know. I can't say if that is or is not similar to Brian Ferentz, if that's something that he did a lot too, but it's just something that I think Iowa fans are already appreciating about Tim Lester, is that he's out there, he's trying to shake hands, sign autographs, and be a part of the Iowa Hawkeye fan community as much as he can.
I will, and I think he'll have a lot of success, but I wouldn't be shocked, as Iowas want to do in the non-con. Things aren't going to be perfect right away. They've had 15 practices in the spring, time off, and now you're getting back in with, again, Kade getting his first live reps in a while, working out some new wide receivers. Guys are still in new positions, getting ready, installing a new offense still. Practice 16, practice 17 today. It might not be totally crisp. I think it'll be a jump of where we saw in the spring where, okay, hey, there's some new plays, there's some fun stuff here going on. But things might look a little wonky, a little out of sync sometimes, which I think is perfectly natural. So fans, I know everyone's always level-headed and doesn't jump to any conclusions and doesn't bury this team immediately. We've said it a few times. Just let it happen.
Sure.
Let it happen. I think everything is in place for there to be ample success. Anything from the last 2 years would be, and would be growth. But prep for growing pains. Just that's a necessity. It's what's bound to happen when you're still working this thing through. But I think Tim Lester, the guys seem to really like him. I think there's a lot of excitement around in the locker room about what's happening. Just, it's going to take time,
Yeah.
There's going to be some clicks that really show you what could happen, but there might be a few plays that you go, oh boy, that's got some work to do still.
I might be jumping ahead in the rundown, but like
Go ahead.
when you're talking about that, it makes me think, because I totally agree. Like, you're not going to be firing all cylinders on a new offense week 1 or even week 2. And when you think about that, who's week 2? It's Iowa State. Mm-hmm. And in this new college football era, that game is increasingly important.
Oh, yeah.
Because before, it's like, you got to win the West, go to the Big Ten title game. And it has no input on your main goal to win a conference title. Now it's like, so what's the main goal? It's like, make the college football playoff. I think that's Iowa State's, almost every Power 4 team's like, if you look to have a good team, like Iowa's got a lot of returning starters, that should be the goal. If Iowa drops that game, week 2, I think it's increasingly tough to make the college football playoff because knowing that Ohio State is on the schedule just a few weeks later.
With the new era and the new landscape of how college football works and looks and is divided into conferences, it's harder to make a conference championship game than it is to make the college football playoff. And so that has to be, I think, the main goal, even bigger than winning a Big Ten title. Making the college football playoff is, I think, has to be the bigger deal for fans, coaches, players, et cetera, because that's what everything is going to be riding on. And I feel like how seasons are going to be judged going forward now that it's a 12-team playoff.
Totally agree. And then it gets you in, the players are going to want to win championships, conference championships, national championships. But it makes you think as a fan when you're sitting back, like, is it better for Iowa to not make the Big Ten title game? Because you're playing Ohio State, Oregon, or Michigan, right? A tough team, potential loss, and is that your third loss? Where do you go from? You saw it when Iowa made the Big Ten title game the past few years. I'm pretty sure they dropped past 12 after that initial loss. So, like, that could be the difference between playing at least on the road in a CFP game, or playing in the Capital One Bowl or Outback Bowl.
And I think that what's interesting about particularly that week 2 game between Iowa and Iowa State is that both teams are going to come into that game with the possibility of making the college football playoff. Iowa State is a team that brings back enough depth and plays in a conference that's maybe not as loaded as the Big Ten is, and so they know that, hey, if we just lose a couple of games in the Big 12, we still got a chance at making the CFP as well. So
that's the double-edged sword. Obviously,
your time,
the offense needs
waiting.
time to gel, but that second game is so important.
It's huge.
It's just going to be interesting to see if the run game can at least get caught up to speed by then, because they've won that game several times with just running and defense.
Having said all that, though, I feel like still the bar is so low in terms of the Hawkeye offense and what people want and hope for, that it's like, as long as they can in that week 1 game, if the offense scores 3 touchdowns, I feel like people are going to be stoked about it. That's going to be like...
I don't know. Iowa scored 3 touchdowns in the opener last year against Utah State, and nobody sounded too stoked.
That's true.
Did they score 3 against?
Yeah.
What's her name?
24-14.
You were there.
What was the final?
24-14, I believe, right?
Okay.
Scored in the second play of the game.
I do remember that one. Yeah. So I think that there is so the offense obviously has struggled so much in the past few years that I think that even though people want new things and big things out of Tim Lester, I think that any sign of even incremental improvement is going to be good for them to see.
So yeah, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys is what do you see as a successful season? Is it win total? Is it since they have all these returners and Cade's make or break last year, he could play. Is it college football playoff or bust? I know that's probably their goal, but that's tough to do. We've never seen it, obviously, because it's new 12-team playoff. But what would you guys see as successful? Just growth?
Yeah, I try not to dip back into the 2010 pool so much because it was on the offensive side and a little bit on the defensive side too. And that 2010 team lost Pat Anger and A.J. Eads and Amari Spivey and a couple other guys that I'm blanking on right now. But they brought so much back on offense. Marv was back, Ricky was back, DJK was back, Adam Robinson was back there, and that team went 7-5. And they put up offensive numbers, but it was just those
4 plays away
as
from
Iowa
like
teams
10
can be. Yeah, it was those little spots. So I have the utmost faith in all those defensive guys that are coming back. You lose Logan Lee, who was a great leader. You lose Joe Evans, who was a great leader. You lose Cooper, who was an absolute superstar. But you've got everybody else back, and it's really easy. I know it's easy to assume, yep, defense is going to be fine, but what if the injury bug bites the defensive side now? Or, what if, you're going up against a new quarterback in Minnesota. Wisconsin's going to be year 2 into their new offense, and Tyler Van Dyke's going to be a kid who could be very good in that offense. When he had consistency in Miami, he was very good there. So you can't make too many assumptions about stuff. So I still think it's a successful season to answer the actual question. I think looking at that schedule, 10 wins, and then that kind of takes care of everything else, right? If you win 10, you're probably finishing, I would guess, top 4 in the Big Ten. If you assume loss to Ohio State and maybe a loss to whether it's Iowa State or if it's a league game. I know people are sleeping on Washington because DeBoer's gone and Penix is gone and Adunze's gone and some other guys are. That's still a roster full of dudes that played for a natty last year. And Jed Fish has been around for a long time. That's a team that could be very sneaky coming in. It sounds like it's going to be a big noon kickoff game. Jed kind of let that go at Big Ten Media Days on Fox. But I think you win 10 games and then everything's kind of in front of you, whether you're playing for a Big Ten title, you got an outside shot at maybe hosting a playoff game or playing in a playoff game. I do think you guys are right. That is kind of the barometer of you got to be one of the top 12 teams. And I think that would be a successful season, is at least knocking on the doorstep with an offense that has helped get you there rather than been a hindrance as we've seen in years past.
Even with the expanded playoff, it's not quite to the point of comparing it to basketball. Basketball, it's like a successful season is making the NCAA tournament, in my estimation, especially if you're a Power 5 school. And so when the Hawkeyes fall short of that, I think that could not be considered a successful season. I don't think that Iowa needs to make, in the football season, they don't need to make the college football playoff to be considered a successful season, but I think that they at least need to be in that conversation come November to at least consider it satisfactory. You go into those final 4 games against Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, and Nebraska, and as long as you're at least talking about as long as we do this, as long as we win at least 3 of these games, we could, at least discuss it. I think that's what Hawkeye fans will consider a successful season, as long as you're at least in the conversation. You're knocking on the door, as Mitch said.
I totally agree. I do think some part of me after the year, if they do fall short of making the CFP with all the talent they're losing and the starters and the senior leadership, I think it will be kind of a punch in the gut to be like, oh man, obviously players will develop, we'll have players that return, and then new players will step up. But it's like this was, a chance with a relatively manageable schedule. I won't call it soft because I think it's a sneaky right now. Wisconsin, Nebraska.
Yep.
Could be a lot better this year in year 2 with their coaches.
You'll hear me talk about Troy as a pretty tough non-conference game.
Washington and UCLA, they have a lot of new pieces. I think Washington will probably be better than UCLA, but at the same time, a Friday night game on the West Coast, Kirk teams usually, they've never played a Friday night game on the West Coast, but when they go west, it's kind of a tough for any of Kirk teams. So it's going to be an interesting schedule to navigate. But if you are on that playoff hump and it's like Nebraska and Iowa, they're both 9-win teams, the winner might get a shot, and you lose that game, that's gonna suck. So you hope that leadership, they have a lot of young guys, at least a quarterback too, Dylan Raiola, yeah. You hope the leadership that you have, the veteran players that you have, kind of tip the scales there. But that's just 12 games into the season, so you can't forecast that far.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back to the depth chart too. We spent all this time talking about the offense, and we dipped into the defense, but we will look at the defensive depth chart as well, and it's a lot like the defensive depth chart from last year. Again, Logan Lee, Joe Evans, Cooper DeJean out of there, a couple other transfers, but we've got a lot of familiar faces back. Sebastian Castro already on the watch list for the Thorpe Award. He's your cash, and talk about a dude who you plug in anywhere, he's going to go make plays. Your linebacking core exactly the same as last year. Kyler Fisher, Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson. Your secondary, Xavier Wampa, Quinn Schulte, Jamari Harris. John Nestor is listed as a starting cornerback. Deshaun Lee is backing up Jamari Harris. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a bit. But your defensive line, Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, Y.A. Black, Ethan Herkett, of course, Joe Evans, a 6-year guy who was a captain and finished his career as number 4 all-time in sacks at Iowa. He is gone. Your backups there, Max Lillen, Jeff Bowie, the pride of West Branch, good to see him healthy and on the 2 deeps. Jeremiah Pittman, a guy who got in and made some plays, and Brian Allen, a dude I know they are very excited about as well. And we saw Will Hubert make a nice play. He's listed 3rd at one of the tackles there. Made a couple nice hits in spring ball. Kenneth Merriweather, another dude I know they're very excited about. So let's talk about, again, John Nestor, a dude who seemed in the off-season was a guy that we got to talk to extensively for the first time, at least once. Some extended conversation there. A guy who played a lot on special teams. Kind of took Cooper's spot in the punt return coverage unit after Cooper went down. Listed ahead of TJ Hall, a guy who's in his, I believe, going into his at least 3rd year in the program. He was the immediate replacement for Cooper against Nebraska in 22 when Cooper got knocked out. Deshaun Lee obviously started a couple games for Jamari and then for Cooper last year. He is backing up Jamari. So what do we think about a secondary that looks a lot like it did last year, at least in terms of the names up there, but John Nestor listed as a starting cornerback heading into the season? What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that he's the list as a starter ahead of either Deshaun Lee or TJ Hall, that both those guys have enough experience they could have been. But everything we heard about him last year when we saw John Nestor on special teams, he looked great out there. So I love seeing him in that spot. But gosh, that is such a dangerous secondary. We of course, in the Big Ten championship game, got to know Cohen Intringer a little bit. That guy can bring a lot of force to the secondary. He's got speed. Zach Lutmer is a kid who Hawkeye fans maybe don't know so well yet. He's from Northwest Iowa. He's another kid that LeVar Woods recruited out of Central Line, George Little Rock, and very similar high school career to Cooper DeJean in terms of being a high school quarterback who won a state championship and moves to the secondary when he gets to the Hawkeyes. So he's a kid we might be seeing Zach Lutmer's name a lot coming up.
He was a guy we heard quite a bit about going into spring ball too, that they're excited about as well. And Deshaun Lee, if you want to call him a quote-unquote backup, he's your number 3, I guess you'd probably consider it, assuming Jamari's your number 1 corner. To have a guy backing up your number 1 corner who's got more than half a dozen starts under his belt and who showed flashes of some really good stuff, I think that's just a credit to the depth here. John.
When's the last season we had a full season without a corner miss a game for a hammy or something,
There you go.
Seems like there's some good depth because, Nestor's the backup for Seb if he, God forbid if he had to miss a few games. I still was surprised when Deshaun wasn't the listed starter, just because he started 6 games last year, you think that would carry over. Now, I don't see ins and outs of practice. I'm not saying that he's not going to, for all we know, he could be the starter come game 1.
It's a late July depth chart.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it signals at least they want to see what he can do as a 1 in August.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to
encouraging.
do. Okay, John, you passed the test on special teams. What can you do when you're lined up against Caleb, against Jarrett, against Dayton, and all these other guys? Let's see if you can really pull it off. And if you struggle, if we see you need a little more time, well, TJ's been in with the ones before in big spots. Deshaun started half a dozen games. We have the depth, like you said, Mike, to spend a little time and test some things out. Again, it's August 1st. We can figure this out before we get into August 31st.
The depth at secondary is incredible. Yeah. Would you guys be worried at all if especially one of these three linebackers goes down, whether it's Jay, Nick, or Kyler, if they're injured for a certain amount of time? I feel like I'm just a little surprised by some of the backups I'm seeing in there. Jackson Rexroth, great career at Xavier, but haven't seen a whole lot of him yet in a Hawkeye
place.
uniform.
He forced a fumble at Nebraska. He was a stalwart on special teams last year, and I believe was basically on the two deeps all of last year. Jaden Harrell's a guy who's backing up Jay. Jaden probably had every opportunity in the world to transfer and go play somewhere else. Kirk brought up his name at one point, I believe, going into the spring, maybe that first press conference, and he did the same with Jay a couple years ago. Kirk mentioned Jay Higgins as a guy. When Kirk brings up a guy's name unprompted, usually means keep an eye on. So I think Jaden Harrell's a guy to keep an eye on. And Carson Schrar had a couple
yeah, he's great.
Couple big hits. So I think, listen, is Jaden Jay? No. Is Carson Nick? No. Is Jackson Kyler? No. But they've shown some stuff, and that's all you can ask from, I think, your backups, especially when your ones are who they are and have played this much ball and have played it at such an exemplary level. All you can ask is that the dudes behind them can just do something. We're spoiled with the depth in the defensive backfield, but I think that linebacking core has got it could pull off some surprises if something happens that they have to get in.
They just, I think my point I'm making is just that they get a little bit young after that, just because, I mean, then we've got some great linebackers who are coming up on this team when you look at those freshmen, especially in Derek Weisskopf and Preston Reese. But if something happens to any linebackers.
I'm not too concerned about the depth on the linebacker. I mean, just because you know, mind you too, like when Seb's in, Kyler's not in. So if like Jay were to be injured, I'm sure Kyler would fit as one of the starters in that cash role. I got to think Jaden and Carson are hungry too, because they could be your starting linebackers if Jay and Nick did not come back. You know, that was probably the plan. And I wonder if Ben Keeter sticks around if there's not as much depth back there. Who knows? You never know. He's focused on wrestling, and maybe he would have done that anyway. I'm just throwing it out there. But, you know, it was never solid, at least until the bowl game, that these two were coming back. But you're glad to have them. I do think these linebackers probably, you know, have been in the system for a few years, and they know what to do. They just haven't seen as much game time.
Yeah. And you get more reps on special teams. And, again, no matter what the offense does, defense and special teams is the cornerstone for Iowa the last couple of years. If you can have guys that could be starters on other Division I Power 4 programs, and they're chasing down returners, I think you'll take that. You'll take a little shoring up there, because I don't know if you put together a graphic for the special teams depth charts.
I didn't.
You didn't. That's okay. Drew Stevens, your starting kicker, and then is it Reese Dakin or Reese Dakin? Dakin, okay. Heard it pronounced a couple different ways, but you got another Aussie back there who seemed like he was getting comfortable pretty well in spring, but again, that's a new guy punting who's still fairly new, not just to the game, but this environment and the program and everything. So anytime you can have more experience on coverage, any part of that special teams unit that LeVar's coaching up to help a guy who, you know, hey, we saw Torrey shank a punt last year. It's possible, no matter your experience. But for a young guy who's still learning the game, learning the techniques, who has shown definitely flashes that hopefully you can get a Torrey 2.0 type of thing going. But if you can have that experience on the special teams unit while he's learning the game and finding himself, the more the merrier there on that special teams unit.
So I am curious to ask you guys then, what you do think, especially if we look at the defensive side, what you do think would be maybe the weak spot in this depth chart. If somebody goes down, where are you like, you start to clinch up a little bit?
I was just going to mention the defensive line depth is the thing that I think is a little concerning, just because the backups, Max Llewellyn, Pittman, and Brian Allen, you saw some game action last year, and I think they want to go more than six or seven deep, and it seems like those starters are solid. I don't think anyone would have any problem. And the backups too that I just mentioned, but there's just some unknowns that, like, will they step up and be, lead Iowa to keep that defense at that level? I think they want to rotate more like 8, 9 guys more than 6 or 7.
Sure, and it's tough to. I mean, you basically lost 2 captains. Logan Lee kind of stepped in as the 5th captain there, and a guy who, it wasn't one of the immediate people that you pointed to as like an absolute star on the defense, but dude played so many games over his time in Iowa City and made an impact. both statistically and just as a leader in that locker room and shoring up the defensive line. If you want to throw your trust in somebody, you throw it in Logan Lee. And that's a tough thing. You don't replace that. You just try to have somebody shore up and step in and do their darndest. And then Joe Evans, talking about an emotional leader, kind of personifies everything you want in an Iowa football program, a guy who walked on, who had opportunities to go somewhere else and, heck, maybe be a quarterback. He was a high school quarterback, and he leaves as one of the great defensive linemen of the last decade here in Iowa and gets a shot in the pros now because of it. Those are two really, really tough things to fill because last year, Herkett wasn't really starting. I mean, kind of by the end of the year, he was getting plenty of reps and I think tied for the lead on the defensive line for tackles for loss. But now he's your full-time starter out there as well. And, you know, you've got guys who were fantastic backups last year. And, I mean, this is football, right? Now that fantastic backup has got to step in, and now you're hoping Brian Allen and the flashes he's shown can make him a fantastic backup to maybe be the next Ethan Herkett on the edge and be able to come in and make those impacts when he can and make a game-saving stop at Iowa State or make some crazy pick at Nebraska and save something. You know, that's just the nature of the beast. But yeah, that's the spot where we're waiting for the most guys to show what they can do because we just don't know yet. You know, again, Jeff Bowie, a kid who was highly touted out of West Branch, has just been banged up, and that's really tough.
Yeah,
you know?
Hasn't seen any action in his career at Iowa.
Yeah, I mean,
and you remember last year, like I thought the D-line was great, but still, like the sacks. I'm looking it up right now, but I don't think they had that many sacks compared to like a normal Iowa defense. At least in the first half of the season, I think they got more when it came down the stretch, but I remember us talking about, hey, where's the pass rush, you know? And a lot of teams were getting the ball out quick, so it was kind of tough, but that's one area of improvement I think we can look at in the first few weeks.
Yeah. Well, it is an expanded Big Ten as of tomorrow, first day officially at school for Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington, moving over from the Pac-12 into the Big Ten, and true coast-to-coast conference now. Obviously, Iowa, as we've talked about, goes to UCLA in November. That's an 8 p.m. game on Fox. We're excited to have that one. And then Washington, again, sounds like it's going to be a big noon kickoff for homecoming in Iowa City on October 12th. So you've got them on the schedule. Let's real quick, as these four teams come in who have all had varying amounts of success, recent success as well, what's your power rankings of these four new teams coming into the Big Ten as they walk in?
This season?
Yeah, as they come in, how do you rank these teams?
Like
Not a
as
rankings guy, but-
power rankings, okay, obviously. Well, Oregon is top of the list.
For sure.
I think USC is going to be second. I think Washington's third, and UCLA. It will be towards the bottom of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have the greatest knowledge right now of a couple of these teams, but I will say Oregon, they come in with Dylan Gabriel, who I've heard is he the Heisman front runner right now? I mean, a lot of people are saying he's going to be a guy who's possibly going to go out and win a Heisman trophy. He's had great success at Oklahoma. He had big numbers last year. So has to be Oregon number one. Washington, I don't know. I really wouldn't be surprised to see Washington come back. And, I mean, I feel like that whole roster feels like they've got something to prove. Even though they literally were playing in the national championship game last year, nobody expects anything out of Washington this year.
To that point, not sorry to interrupt, but like I was looking through the rosters and stuff. From the national title game, the starters on offense and defense, they've only got two coming back. And that's a linebacker and a corner. And 14 of them, including 14 starters, and one of them's the backup tight end, all went to the NFL. 6 transferred to a Power 5. Left guard, center, and right guard. The guards went to Ole Miss, and the center went to Alabama. They had some corners and defensive players go to Oregon, Miami, and Florida. So, like, some highly talented players they're losing.
Yeah.
But they did bring in a ton from the portal, too. So I think Will Rogers is their quarterback from Mississippi State.
Sure.
One fun fact, and I'll let you, sorry to interrupt again. The two teams we play, Oregon and UCLA, some of their coordinators, and you might know
Washington
this.
and UCLA.
You watched, yeah, what'd I say? Oregon?
You said
Washington
Oregon.
and UCLA.
Don't wish that.
Washington, defensive coordinator Steve Belichick, Bill Belichick's kid. And the offensive coordinator, I forgot about this till last night when I was looking at it, is Eric Bieniemy.
Yeah.
So, like, it's just an interesting storyline because Eric Bieniemy was like, when's he going to get an NFL head coaching job? And now he's going to be not in Kinnick, but playing Iowa next year. And then maybe will we see Bill Belichick on the sidelines like we saw Tom Izzo last year? Who knows? I'm just saying.
Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot more to add, frankly. I was like, I mean, Oregon is the clear number one. I think that Washington, can come out and do some things this year. And then, I think that I don't know a whole lot about USC and UCLA. I know that they've They're not the teams that they used to be, but I think that they obviously still have a big reputation. It's going to be fun games going out there to LA to play at UCLA, but I'd imagine those are the two. In my estimation, I'd say those are the two lower teams that are coming into the league.
USC could be scary, though. It's Lincoln Riley. It's that offense, that Miller Moss kid who's your starting quarterback now.
Yeah.
Went off in the bowl game. That's the only reason I know the name Miller Moss is because Gus Johnson was screaming it every 5 minutes during that bowl game. He looked outstanding. You feel for UCLA. Dante Moore was this freshman phenom who came in and ended up being a starter. Looked like a freshman at times, but showed some sparks. He is now backing up Dylan Gabriel in Oregon. He transferred to Eugene. So it's a tough spot. UCLA, I think they'll find their niche in the Big Ten, and they'll be fine. But, new coach Chip Kelly goes and becomes the OC at Ohio State, as if Ohio State needs any help scoring points at any point. It'll be tough, but again, it's exciting. It's UCLA, and that's a team that, snap of a finger, they can go win 10, 11 games once they get everything going, and Deshaun Foster seems to be a guy that people really like there.
USC's new defensive coordinator, too, was the defensive coordinator.
All the coordinators in Pac-12.
We're just looking at it. He was the defensive coordinator at UCLA, who had a pretty good defense last year. They were 8-5. But he went across town, and you'd think their defense would be a little better with the amount of talent they have, new DC, but it's kind of like Tim last year. You guys got to wait and see until they do it. Yeah. How much of this new Big Ten, though, do you guys think will be, schedule dependent? Like you look at Oregon, and they play, Ohio State. They play at Michigan in November, at Wisconsin and Washington. It seems like Iowa has one game against the top 6 of the, media members, top, 6 Big Ten teams. But then the rest of them are on the back end of the schedule. So it's harder to get a balanced schedule from team to team. Do you guys think that will, make a big impact?
That's probably a price of having an 18-team conference now, is that you're going to have more haves and have-nots. As much as you love parity and balance, and the 18th team on any given day can beat the number 2, 3, or even the number 1 team. We drew a lot of Premier League parallels, and this is kind of what it is probably just inevitably going to feel like, is that there's going to be a relegation zone or something that feels like a relegate. Like, Nottingham Forest is going to have a heck of a time trying to knock off Arsenal at Anfield, or not. That's Liverpool at Emirates. It's just going to be a tough thing. It's going to be really tough for the. I don't want to say if it's Rutgers will be decent. I don't want to name any team that could be dead last.
Rutgers actually has a really
they're
solid
going to be
schedule.
tough. And Kaliakmanis is a guy who we saw at Minnesota. He's now going to be your starter there. So he's
guy with Kaliakmanis. He's talking about him all last year. He's back.
I just like showing off that I can pronounce a tough name because I've butchered enough. So I'm like, Ethan Kaliakmanis, yeah.
Rutgers is a team.
Rutgers could be tough.
Who they don't play. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Penn State. They don't play Oregon. That's the top 4 teams predicted. They don't play Iowa.
Rutgers plays Minnesota because Cali goes.
Their toughest game on the schedule is play at USC and a non-con against at Virginia Tech. And then after that, Washington, at Nebraska, Wisconsin, UCLA, USC, Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State. That could be an 8 or 9 win season for Rutgers.
To your point, and the point I guess I was trying to make is that, it can be very schedule dependent because you've got 17 other possible teams you could play, and there's going to be some usual matchups and trophy games and things like that. But it's a little bit of luck of the draw. If you get a path, as we've seen, Iowa gets a few times where the expectation becomes, hey, we don't play this team, go win 11 games.
I've really let this podcast go off the rails and let Mitch and Mike take over too much because now we've brought up, number 1, the Premier League, number 2, video games. I got to rein you guys.
I got a Deadpool and Wolverine review to put a button on things, too.
I would be curious to hear your guys' opinion on this. How many newcomers to the Big Ten do you think are going to be playing in the Big Ten championship game? 0, 1, or 2?
This year?
Yeah, this year.
I hate to go full chalk, but I really think Ohio State and Oregon are the 2 best teams, at least roster-wise. I would say Oregon makes it. Yeah. They got a tough schedule, though.
What do you think? None, 1, 2?
I'm going to say 0.
0? Okay.
Just, who knows? I think, who's Oregon play in November? They have to come to the Midwest, and granted the Northwest.
At Michigan, at home against Maryland, at Wisconsin, at home against Washington.
Circle Madison.
Yeah.
That's an interesting game.
I mean, you play
That's a
at the big house and
real
at
interesting
Camp
game.
Randall.
And that's going to be tough,
Those
too.
are two tough games.
Those are, yeah, that's tough.
And at home against Washington, too. I mean, those are two teams that don't like each other. And
Washington beat them twice last year. I'm sure they.
If anybody in the Big Ten right now could win a natty, Dan Lanning has set himself up real nice for it.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, he's come a long way since he was a GA for Pitt in 2011 at Kinnick, and watching that team come back on him. They've got every ability and player imaginable to win a national title. But the Big Ten in November, man, I don't care if this team's from Southern California or Piscataway or Iowa City. Big Ten in November, man. It's something different. Think of a playoff game in the Midwest in December.
Yeah, I've heard
Lincoln
rumblings
or
that
Iowa City or Minneapolis hosting a playoff game or
there's
Champaign.
talks to try and. I think I was listening to the Cover 3 podcast. They were talking about how, or maybe it was Iowa Everywhere. I'm not really sure, but they're like, there's early discussions to be like, well, if there's an ice storm or a snowstorm, we have to find an alternate. And I do not hope
They
that
plowed the
passes.
field before 2015 Purdue. when
Yeah.
Iowa won the West. They can figure it out. That's just the price of making the playoff if you got to play the Hawks.
you
or
got-
someone from the former Big Ten West. All right,
Northern teams have been going down to play in 90-degree weather in Florida and just getting dog walked
topsy-turvy it.
for so long. Let's turn it around.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to do this again on Tuesday, I believe. We're going to preview Kids Day. That'll be our first look at this fall edition of the 2024 Hawkeyes. Of course, we've got Media Day on Friday the 9th, Kids Day on the 10th, so we'll have plenty new footage and everything like that. We'll get to talk to these guys, hear a little bit of how things are going, so that'll be exciting as we get into season 2. Again, real quick, Deadpool and Wolverine, I got out of it like an hour ago. Highly recommended. Super, super fun movie.
Don't take your kids.
Don't take your kids. This is not, it's rated R, and there's signs up at Marcus
It's great.
Theater on Council Street. But it was a fun movie, right?
It was really fun. I thought it started slow after that first scene, but I mean, it's worth the wait. I had to wait for a while.
Yeah.
I'm 4 episodes into the latest season of The Bear, and there's a great moment I want to talk about with you guys in terms of a long cut that they do in episode 4.
Love our long cuts on the Bear.
But we can go into that after.
That's
after we wrap it up.
yeah. I know it's been a divisive, however you want to pronounce it. Season 3. I really, really enjoyed it. I liked it. That it was maybe not what people were hoping for or expecting or whatever we want to get to. And House of the Dragon. We'll just plug every show we're watching. House of the Dragon season finale coming up on Sunday. Yeah, a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff, guys. So we're gonna wrap up here and keep on trucking next Tuesday and get this 2024 campaign rolling. We have another pod to cover or to plug too. So we're a Fox affiliate, right?
Not yet.
We don't have to.
Well, we will, but it hasn't actually launched. So I should tell you
Joel
that before.
Klatt has a podcast. Listen to that, and then there's another one we'll talk about later.
That one hasn't officially been announced, but
Gotcha.
cool things coming.
Regardless, stay tuned to the YouTube page because we're going to have a lot of Hawkeye content coming on there, both with the Eye on the Hawks content and the Eye on the Hawks bonus content with everything else related to Hawkeyes.
Yeah, and I'll learn how to do outros at some point here in this season. This will be the season of the outro where we learn how to just stick a landing. Not today, though. Not today. For Mike and Owen, I'm Mitch. This has been your season premiere of Eye on the Hawks. Excited to see what happens in this 2024 campaign. See you next time.